On the morning after Christmas, America woke to a story that looked staged, scripted, almost impossible: a missing 6-year-old girl, a bizarre ransom note inside her own home, and by the end of the day, a body discovered in the basement. For 29 years, the JonBenét Ramsey case has lived in that terrifying space between evidence and myth, between science and suspicion. Now, as investigators say, new evidence has been collected, old evidence retested, and DNA technology keeps evolving, one question returns with unsettling force: what if the answer was always there, waiting for science to finally catch up fully? December 26, 1996. Boulder, Colorado. Before sunrise, a mother dials 911 and says her 6-year-old daughter is gone. On a staircase inside the Ramsey home lies a ransom note, long, theatrical, and chillingly specific, demanding $118,000. It does not read like panic. It reads like staging. Outside, Christmas lights still glow in the winter dark. Inside, a nightmare is beginning to rearrange itself into a puzzle that should not exist. A kidnapping without a missing child. A threat written inside the house. From the first hour, this case seems to violate the logic of crime. Then the horror deepens. Hours after the 911 call, JonBenét Ramsey is found dead in the basement of her own home. In a single day, a missing child case becomes an unsolved homicide that will grip America for generations. The contrast is part of what made it unforgettable. A little girl known through bright pageant images suddenly trapped inside one of the darkest crime stories in modern American memory. Nearly 3 decades later, no one has been convicted. The case remains open. And what survives is not grief, but a wound, preserved by suspicion, spectacle, and the hunger for an answer. At first, many believed the truth would emerge quickly. But attention can destroy clarity as easily as it creates pressure. The JonBenét case exploded into a media storm where every detail became symbolic: the wealthy family, the Christmas setting, the handwritten note, the body inside the house. It was not treated like a murder alone. It became a cultural obsession, a national theater where guilt was argued long before evidence was understood. In that atmosphere, theories multiplied faster than facts. And once a case becomes mythology, every clue must fight not only silence, but decades of narrative built around it. Yet beneath the noise, one element refused to disappear: DNA. Over the years, investigators identified genetic material from an unknown male on JonBenét's clothing, while the Ramsey family was excluded from that profile. To some, that changed the meaning of everything. It pointed toward an intruder, a figure from outside the home. To others, it settled nothing. Trace DNA can illuminate a killer, but it can also reflect innocent transfer, manufacturing contamination, or contact unrelated to the crime itself. Instead of ending the argument, the DNA made the mystery more sophisticated, more divisive, and more dangerous than the public understood. That is why the case has surged back into focus. Boulder police say the investigation never stopped. Detectives have followed more than 21,000 tips, interviewed or spoken with more than 1,000 people, and worked with partners across state and federal agencies as well as DNA specialists. In updates, investigators have said they collected new evidence, conducted new interviews, re-interviewed individuals, and tested and retested older items to develop leads. Those words matter because they suggest movement where the public once saw stagnation. In cold cases, momentum is not visible. Sometimes it begins inside a laboratory, not a courtroom. And that is the new gravity of this story. The question is no longer who looked suspicious in 1996. The question is whether modern forensic science can do what investigators in 1996 could not. Across America, DNA methods have reopened cases once considered hopeless, turning traces into names, families, timelines, and arrest warrants. A cold case is not frozen in the way it once was. Evidence can age, but technology can evolve faster than doubt. Every improvement in extraction, amplification, and comparison creates possibility that a murderer may be standing there in the science, waiting at last to be recognized. But this possibility comes with a trap. DNA is no confession. It is a fragment, and fragments demand interpretation. In a case contaminated by time, publicity, and human error, even powerful technology must answer questions. Was the sample preserved well enough? Is it complete enough to identify a suspect? Does it belong to the killer, or to someone whose contact with the clothing meant nothing? The deeper science goes, the higher the stakes rise today. Because if the DNA speaks clearly, it could rewrite the history of this case. If it whispers ambiguously, it could fuel another decade of war. That is what makes JonBenét Ramsey's case feel alive decades later. It is not an unsolved murder. It is a collision between memory and evidence, between mythology and molecular truth. A child died in a house crowded with symbols, and for 29 years the world has argued over which symbol mattered most. But now one detail may become the force in the story. Not the note. Not the rumors. Not the accusations. Just a trace, invisible to the eye, preserved through time. The question is no longer whether the case is haunting. The question is whether science can survive it. To understand why new DNA could break this case open, you have to leave the courtroom and enter the microscopic battlefield. People imagine DNA as a perfect fingerprint, a code that either names the killer or does not. But modern forensic science is more unsettling. Today, laboratories can recover genetic traces from only a few skin cells left behind by touch. That sensitivity is extraordinary. It is dangerous. Once science becomes powerful enough to hear whispers, it must learn not to mistake echoes for truth. This is the hidden mechanism inside the JonBenét Ramsey mystery. Trace DNA is almost nothing, a few molecules, a fragment of a presence, a shadow clinging to fabric. Yet those fragments can survive for years, and with better extraction methods, analysts can recover more from old evidence than earlier labs could. That is one reason cold cases have come back to life. Samples once considered too weak or degraded can now be examined with tools stronger than those available in the 1990s. In theory, that means evidence from JonBenét's case may still contain information investigators could not fully hear. But sensitivity creates a second problem. The more powerfully a lab can detect DNA, the more likely it is to detect DNA from several people at once. We imagine a crime scene as if the guilty person arrives, leaves one genetic signature, and disappears. Real life is messy. People shed DNA when they speak, touch, sneeze, move clothing, handle packaging, or brush against an object. A single item can carry traces from multiple contacts across time. According to NIST, these mixtures have become common because modern methods are so sensitive. The technology did not create the complexity. It revealed it. Once a sample becomes a mixture, interpretation turns into probability rather than certainty. Analysts must ask how many contributors may be present, how much DNA each person contributed, and whether the sample has degraded. A strong profile can stand out like a spotlight. A weak or partial profile can flicker like a distant signal in a storm. Sometimes a tiny amount from one unknown person is meaningful. Sometimes it is noise. That distinction is everything. In a case as famous as JonBenét's, one misunderstood trace could redirect suspicion and harden the wrong story. This is why arguments over the DNA never ended. To one side, unidentified male DNA suggested an intruder, a stranger who entered the house and vanished into history. To the other side, the same result did not guarantee an intruder at all. Trace DNA can arrive through secondary transfer, through manufacturing, through handling long before a crime occurs, or through innocent contact. NIJ's work on touch DNA emphasizes this challenge. Such material can be powerful evidence, but it is also difficult because the quantity is low, the deposition is variable, and persistence can depend heavily on conditions. DNA may be the star witness in this case, or only the loudest ghost. Then comes the next frontier, forensic genetic genealogy. Traditional databases compare crime scene DNA against known offenders or stored profiles. Genealogy works differently. It can use a forensic profile, when suitable, to search for distant relatives in approved databases, then build family trees until one possible person emerges. The method has helped identify offenders, exonerate innocent suspects, and reopen cases silent for decades. Yet even the Department of Justice frames it as a powerful tool that must be used carefully because of privacy concerns, sample consumption, and the consequences of getting the science wrong. And that may be the deepest twist in the JonBenét case. The real question is not whether DNA exists. It is whether the right kind of DNA exists. Is there enough material, from the right source, preserved with enough integrity, to produce a profile suitable for advanced comparison or genealogical work? Can analysts separate signal from contamination, crime from contact, history from accident? Boulder police have been careful publicly. They have not promised a breakthrough. What they have said is revealing. The case remains a priority. New evidence has been collected, old evidence has been tested and retested, and DNA technology continues to evolve. That is not closure. It is a door left open in the dark. Because the hidden mechanism of this mystery is also temporal. Every year that passes changes two things at once. Evidence grows older, and technology grows sharper. One decays. The other advances. Somewhere between those two curves lies the truth. If investigators are standing near that crossing point now, then this case is more unnerving than ever. After 29 years of rumor, accusation, and obsession, the final answer may come not from the loudest theory, but from the smallest surviving trace. A few invisible cells, waiting to decide whether America has been haunted by a mystery, or by a misread signal all along. If this case is solved by DNA, the answer will do more than name a killer. It will expose how fragile justice becomes when technology lags behind violence. In 1996, investigators entered a crime scene already transforming into legend. Today they work in a different world, where degraded samples can be reanalyzed, family trees can be built from relatives, and a few invisible cells can challenge decades of accusation. That possibility changes the scale of the JonBenét Ramsey story. It is no longer only about one unsolved murder. It is about whether truth can survive time, error, and spectacle. And if the case is not solved, that failure will mean something too. It would suggest that even in an age of astonishing forensic power, some crimes pass through the world in fragments too damaged to reconstruct completely. Boulder police have said the investigation remains active, that evidence has been tested and retested, and interviews have been pursued. But active is not solved. The public imagines cold cases as locked doors waiting for stronger keys. In reality, some doors were warped from the beginning. Evidence can be lost, compromised, misunderstood, or too incomplete to carry a name. That is why the JonBenét case matters far beyond Boulder. It became one of America's mysteries because it fused private grief with obsession. News coverage turned a child into an image, a family into suspects in the national imagination, and uncertainty into entertainment. If DNA finally identifies a perpetrator, it could force a reckoning with decades of certainty. It could reveal that the loudest stories were wrong, that suspicion attached itself to the nearest faces because human beings fear ambiguity more than injustice. Sometimes what haunts a society is not only the crime, but the speed with which it invents explanations. There is also a darker implication. Every breakthrough in forensic science expands hope, but it also expands responsibility. Genetic genealogy has helped identify suspects in previously unsolved cases, yet the Department of Justice emphasizes careful standards because privacy, false direction, and irreversible consequences are always at stake. A dramatic answer is not enough. It must be the right answer, built on validated science, preserved evidence, and disciplined interpretation. Otherwise, the same tools that promise liberation from uncertainty can become instruments of error. The future of cold case justice may depend on sharper technology and greater humility in the people using it. For John Ramsey and for everyone who loved JonBenét, the implications are more intimate. Time does not reduce a crime like this, it alters its shape. Grief becomes layered with exhaustion, memory with repetition, hope with mistrust. When a case lasts 29 years, the investigation becomes part of a family's life, almost another presence in the room. Every new statement, every rumored lead, every advance in DNA analysis carries a cruel double edge. It offers the possibility of truth, but it also reopens the oldest wound. In that sense, science enters a house where sorrow never left. And then there is the question beneath the evidence: why are we still unable to look away? Part of the answer lies in innocence interrupted. A 6-year-old child, Christmas night, a wealthy home that seemed safe, a ransom note that felt theatrical, and a death that still resists explanation. The case sits where order meets chaos, where the familiar world appears counterfeit. We return to it because it threatens one of our deepest beliefs, that evil leaves a shape we can recognize. But some crimes do not. Some dissolve into noise, and our hunger for clarity becomes part of the story. So the new DNA does not simply promise identification. It promises a verdict on the age that failed to solve this case the first time. It tests the original investigation, the media culture that amplified suspicion, and the scientific limits of the late 20th century. If the evidence yields a name, the meaning will echo backward through decades of arguments, documentaries, accusations, and doubt. It will remind us that truth can move slowly while rumor moves at the speed of fear. And if no answer comes, the silence will be revealing. It will tell us there are mysteries that modern power cannot command. That may be the most unsettling lesson of all. We build laboratories to force the past to speak. We build stories to make cases bearable. We build systems of justice to assure ourselves that every wound can eventually be named. But the JonBenét Ramsey case stands at the edge of all three promises. It asks whether science can rescue truth from history, and whether truth, once found, can repair what history has already done. Perhaps that is why this mystery endures. Not because it is unsolved, but because it reveals how human beings live between evidence and darkness, listening for a voice.